Hello and welcome to our cottage garden. Today we're going to tell you about how you can make your garden wildlife friendly based on some of the tips that we use in the garden here. You have joined us on a very windy day, so sorry if there's a bit of background noise. Hopefully it's fine. This video isn't about perfectionism, it's about taking some things and doing them where you can. It's not useful to be perfectionist, and this is the kind of thing where a few small changes will add up to make a really big difference. So over the years in the garden here, we've had a pleasure of meeting so many different creatures, from bigger things like badgers, moles, hedgehogs, down to the smaller things like frogs, toads and slow worms, even a grass snake at one point. And of course, the even tinier things, the bees, butterflies, flies and insects all count. And having a wildlife-friendly garden does mean embracing the whole bigger picture. Some creatures we look at really fondly, for example hedgehogs, sometimes foxes, and others we might be scared of or turn our nose up at, like spiders for example, perhaps toads, but they all work together to create a balanced ecosystem, and you can't have the lovely things at the top without having some of the annoying things at the bottom. So for example, flies, mosquitoes, the kind of more annoying creatures, they feed bats, and generally we look at bats in a more favourable light. So it's kind of about letting go of some of our ideas about what's good and bad in a garden and embracing a bigger picture. This video is sponsored by Riolink, so thank you to them for supporting our channel and helping me keep an eye on my tools and my ducks. So this is the Riolink Go PT Ultra. It's a 4K security camera that I've added to my shed to help keep an eye on my tools. The really handy thing about this is it's wire-free, so it connects using 4G and it's powered by solar, which means I don't need connectivity or mains access to be able to use the camera on the shed. I'm using the solar panel to power the camera. Riolink is a leader in security tech, with cameras designed for both on-grid and totally off-grid spaces like sheds, fields, or anywhere you'd rather not drag an extension lead. The Go PT Ultra records in 4K Ultra HD, has smart motion detection for people, cars, and animals, which in my case means including the local wildlife and a few mischievous ducks. One of my favourite things is the Riolink app. I can check the live feed, get real-time alerts, and even speak through it with two-way audio. So whether it's a delivery or just someone borrowing my trowel, I know what's going on. And this is the solar panel too. It keeps the camera running completely off-grid, which is ideal for spots like this. Set it up once and forget about it. No climbing up ladders to recharge things every few weeks. And as a bonus feature, it does time lapse. So beyond security, I've used it to record sunrises, garden changes, and a few very noisy ducks. It's funny how a camera meant for safety ends up capturing some of the most magical little moments too. So whether you're keeping an eye on your tools, your shed, your front door, or even your animals, the Riolink Go PT Ultra and the solar panel 2 are a really helpful combination. Super clear footage, no wires, and easy setup, so place it where you want to and let it do its thing. And as a heads up, Riolink are running a promotion for Prime Day, so you can get discounts of up to 50% off via Amazon or directly through Riolink. The Go PT Ultra and the solar panel 2 have 29% off in both the US and the UK, which is where I know most of you are watching from. So if you're looking to upgrade or start your security system, now is a really good time. Check out the link in the video description to learn more and to browse the full range of products. And thank you so much to Riolink for supporting our channel and sponsoring this video. If you're going to do one thing in your garden, arguably the best thing for the wildlife is to start a wildlife pond. Ours is about 3 meters long and 2 meters wide, and it's reasonably deep, I think perhaps about a meter in the deepest places, with a marginal shelf as well. But it doesn't need to be this big. You can start a really small one in a container and it will still hold a really full ecosystem. And there are obvious creatures that this supports, things like frogs and newts, and we certainly see plenty of those. But beyond the pond life itself, the pond also offers drinks to pollinators, so things like bees, and then the birds often perch on the edge and have a drink as well. So some of the features that you'll see in our pond are shallow areas. These work in case any small mammals end up falling in and need to crawl out. It acts as a sort of staircase, and that's what you can see with these rocks around the edge. This also gives a platform for bees to stop and perch on while they have a drink. You'll also see that the environment of this pond is kind of staggered. So we've got some areas that are in shade, some are in sunlight, and a few different plantings as well. And when I was researching how to start the pond, the advice that I was given was to not rush to the end result, because early ponds are just as valuable as ponds that are later in their lifestyle as well, and they all support a variety of creatures. And rather than rushing to plant it out yourself, it's good to let some things self-seed, especially if you spot native plants arriving on their own. And that's what's happened. So we've got things like water parsley and purple loosestrife that have arrived on their own, and then things that I've added as well, including natives like water mint and marsh marigold, and some plants that are just for my benefit as well, because it's a mix. You're allowed to enjoy things whilst you're supporting the wildlife too. So I've got the water lily for me. And that still will introduce a bit of shade for creatures to hide. Things like newts that might be eaten by birds will have somewhere where they can stay safe. And you'll see that the environment of the pond isn't too controlled, so it might look a little bit messy, and that really is what it's about. So we've got things like frogbit and duckweed that cover the surface, a bit of algae as well. And these are really important again for providing shade for creatures to hide in, and keeping the temperature of the pond cooler so that there's less evaporation and it can maintain its water level. But it's a really, really lovely thing to have in the garden, not only for the wildlife but also for personal well-being too. The sound of the water and the reflections are really calming, and it's a gorgeous space. Second tip is to embrace wild areas of garden. So this is our wildest part. This might be a bit too chaotic for you, and that's fine. The kind of general idea is it's okay to have long grass, and it's really good if you can keep some parts wilder. The way that we do it in the garden is we stagger the way we grow the lawn. So close to the house where we use it and the dogs use it and the ducks use it, the grass is nice and short and it's purely functional. We're not trying really to support much in the way of wildlife on those areas. And then as you move slightly up the garden, we've got a kind of medium section, and I do mow this but less frequently. So I let the grass and whatever else is in there get to about this tall before I mow it. And if there's anything in there in flower, I leave it be and let it complete its flowering cycle so that it provides pollen to the pollinators. And what I've found in those parts of the garden is we get things like clover, buttercups, self-heal, lots of lovely things have naturalised, and it's created almost a kind of ankle height meadow, which I find really beautiful. There are some plants that I've found challenging, so things like dandelions that I've realised I've really been trained to see as a weed, but I've tried to overcome seeing them in this way because they help the wildlife. And at the end of the day, even if I don't like them, they're only there for a few weeks of the year before they die back. So I've embraced them, and now I see them as something that I like, and I actually really love that kind of chaotic muddle of the medium length lawn. At the top here, we don't mow at all, and what we've noticed is this area is really good for habitat. So it's mostly a kind of rich grassy part of the garden. We get things like nettles and foxgloves and a few taprooty plants as well, so things like cow parsley and comfrey. So the tallest level is often good for the pollinators, particularly in spring. But this time of year it's a really good undisturbed habitat, and we get things here like badgers, hedgehogs and foxes, which obviously is a little bit of a nuisance when you try to grow vegetables in your garden. They can end up pinching the vegetables, but they live here just as much as we do. And we clear this probably once a year in September, just to try and stay on top of things like brambles and ivy that will take over if we don't get involved with this space at all. But this is the least managed part of the garden, and it's still productive. We still grow fruit here, so we've got raspberries, apples, pears, figs and cherries, but mostly it's left to the wildlife. And where these kind of weeds go to seed, it's really good food for the birds as well, and you can often spot wild birds just sat on top of some of the plants eating the seed heads. So it's a really good way to stagger things. And again, it's not black and white. You can leave a tiny strip of your grass to grow long and support the pollinators. Perhaps you can mow it less. And even if you keep your grass at kind of lesser mowing regimen, you're still allowing pollen for the pollinators. And then these really chaotic areas are great habitat as well. So you can take what you want from that. But again, it's kind of about embracing mess and coming to terms with the fact that plants aren't inherently bad, even if we've been socialized to see them as weeds. They support our native wildlife really, really well. The other thing that I like to play around with in the garden, in the shorter areas of lawn, is naturalizing bulbs. And this is really good for our early pollinators, like the bees that wake up in February and need a source of food. But it's also beautiful and a way of making use of the space beyond the border to grow something ornamental. But I love this kind of hybrid view that I can be rewarded for something and I can share that with the animals in the garden, and the bees certainly love the crocuses that I grow in the grass in February. The third thing you can do in your garden to help the wildlife is creation of habitat through dead hedges. Some people do these in a really tidy way, where they'll create a kind of pin to hold the sticks and logs in place. I just pile things and tuck them away. So I've got my biggest one here. And this is just a pile of any prunings from fruit trees. When dead trees have come down, rather than burning them, I just leave them in a stack. And these are amazing for so many different creatures. So there are birds that nest on the ground, like robins and wrens, that will use something like this, perhaps mice or hedgehogs or those smaller creatures. And a creature of particular importance that's often overlooked are beetles, and rotting wood is really good for beetles. In our area, particularly stag beetles, and they need long-term rotting wood. So a stag beetle needs an area of rotting wood for between 5 and 10 years to complete its life cycle. So it's really important that we make these dead hedges and that we leave them well alone for a long time. If you're a bit tidier than I am, you can put them under hedges and behind trees so that you can't keep them visible, perhaps at the back of the garden, maybe behind the shed. They'll always be useful whether you can see them or not. So I make piles of prunings and cuttings like these in various places around the garden so that different creatures can use them at different times. I keep them topped up if I'm pruning things, and then if I'm cutting a hedge, I'll push the prunings underneath the hedge rather than putting them on the compost. And this creates really nice tucked away habitats for beetles, birds and other kind of ground dwelling creatures that need a bit of safety or rotting wood. Another thing you can do that really helps the wildlife in the garden is to avoid using chemicals and pesticides, because these will directly kill the wildlife. The good news is though, you don't need to rely on them, and actually the natural ecosystem of the garden can provide really good pest control for you. So here, for instance, when we see aphids on the roses as the buds are emerging, we leave them and eventually ladybirds do move in. These kind of food webs can take a few years to establish, so if you have been using pesticides in the garden, it might take a while for you to notice that the natural predators move in, but it will happen, and it requires a bit of trust and patience. So we've been here for 5 or 6 years now, and we don't need chemicals. Most of our crops will be fine. We get things like predatory wasps and ladybirds that help us. The birds help us as well, and there's a really lovely web that kind of takes care of itself. And wild birds are amazing, because if you encourage them to the garden, they act as kind of personal pest removal services, and they'll sit on your crops and peck off any nasties. The other thing we use here are a flock of ducks, and the ducks are really useful for managing slugs and snails. They absolutely love eating slugs. They do eat a few other things as well. You can see they're eating the grass behind me, but it gives us an extra step of protection against the slugs. We live somewhere that can be quite damp, and so slugs and snails are one of the biggest pests in the garden, but of course they're part of the ecosystem as well. And even if we didn't have the ducks, if we can encourage wild birds to the garden, they help us take care of the slug and snail population. Another helpful strategy to encourage predatory insects to the garden is to leave some of your food crops to go to flower. So things like kales and brassicas that will have these really lovely yellow flowers. If you leave a few plants in the ground to finish their natural life cycle, These flowers will then attract wasps that will eat any pests that would eat the next generation of kales and brassicas. So by leaving a few plants in the ground to complete the life cycle, you'll bring in the pest control for the next generation. And the flowers are beautiful too. So again, this one is kind of a case of unlearning those classic garden rules and trusting the process and the wildlife that comes with it. Borders now where I grow most of my perennial plants, and the tip here is to leave the leaves. So in autumn we will have leaves from an oak tree, an acer tree, some plum trees and an elder as well, and rather than removing these I let them fall directly onto the soil. I do take them off the grass because they can shade out the grass, but on the soil they do really well. You may know already that they're really good for protecting the soil from frost and returning nutrients as they break down, but they also provide really good shelter for overwintering insects. So if I go for a rummage over the autumn and winter in these leaves, I'll find things like bees, caterpillars and other creatures that are overwintering. And in turn, I've noticed that these are really good food for the robins as well. And so I often find the robins will fly down here in the winter and rustle through the leaves and find a source of food. So it's a really easy way to protect your soil. It saves effort from tidying up the leaves and it supports that wider web as well. Thing is to think about planting. So behind me you can see we have a few open petal varieties of plants, including a rose and a clematis. And when flowers aren't really tightly bunched with petals, it means the pollinators can access them and get food really easily. So it's good to include some of those plants in your planting mix. And in terms of strategy, on the whole, we use a mix of native and non-native plants. And the idea is that the native plants are obviously really useful to the native insects. And these can include things like weeds that are more demonized. So for us, it means things like foxgloves, ox-eyed daisies, clover, thistle, anything we notice popping up. If it looks nice and it's in the right kind of place, we leave it alone. We do selectively weed, so where we get things like bindweed growing amongst our food, we will pull some of that out, but a lot of it we leave in and we've learned to embrace. Using non-native plants, so long as they're not invasive, is really good for prolonging the season for the pollinators. So as I mentioned earlier, I grow lots of early flowering bulbs, including snowdrops and crocuses in the lawn. And these aren't native, but they're not invasive either, and they're really helpful for the bees in February when there isn't much other food around for them. I also grow hellebores early in the season, and then I grow lots of asters, which help provide forage for the bees in September and October when there isn't much around. So the main message really is not to think of it in a black and white way, to try and avoid invasive species, but knowing that a diverse range of plants is a really good thing, and the more you can add and the longer you can prolong the flowering season, it will provide really helpful food for the pollinators. There you go, those are some tips you can take away for your garden. It's really good to research your local area and come to terms with the local plants. So if you're out on a walk, notice the hedgerows and what's in flower and check what's native, and then grow some of that in your growing space too. It's not about perfectionism and it's not about having a really big space, but it's about learning how the small things matter, and then we can translate what we learn in our gardens into the wider world and start encouraging more people to grow in a way that centres the wildlife as well as their own needs. So I hope you enjoyed watching, and please do subscribe if you'd like to see more from our cottage garden.